Hello everybody, in today's video we're going to be going over a snow event which is going to be taking place for tomorrow, Friday, and even into Saturday for parts of the interior Northeast. For those of you wondering about that Monday and Tuesday storm, I'm going to hold off on talking about that until another couple of days. Maybe I'll start talking about it tomorrow, but I really think that I'm going to hold off on making any final predictions until we at least get to Saturday or Sunday. Just because, again, we are still far away from that event occurring. And recently, especially with the morning and now the early afternoon runs of some of these models, we are seeing some changes. So while maybe 24 hours ago, most of the models were in line and kind of showing the same thing of some snow in certain areas, it looks like that is starting to change where models are starting to become a little bit more all over the place. So I'm going to let the models figure it out, and then in the next couple of days, we'll at least start talking about it, but don't expect any final forecasts on that anytime soon until we really get to this weekend. So here's a look at what the current National Weather Service page looks like. You can see that we do have some winter weather, or some wind advisories actually, in parts of Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas. We have a few freeze warnings up for parts of Arizona, and then we have a red flag warning and wind advisories up for Southern California. Really, it is a quiet day in terms of overall weather events for right now and also for the past couple of days. Really, until we get that storm, which is going to be happening tomorrow, once that moves through, it's going to kind of set off this whole pattern of becoming more and more active. So we're going to see multiple different storms dive in from the northern plains in quick succession, and that's going to start to become a little bit more of a pattern into these areas. Yesterday, we had a high temperature of 84 degrees in Rio Grande Village, Texas. The low temperature was at -1 degrees in Alamosa, Colorado, as well as Bodie, California. And the highest rainfall report was 1.12 inches in Norwood, Washington. The highest snowfall report was 12 inches in Eckerman, Michigan, and that is in the upper peninsula of Michigan. So here's a look at the European model. We're going to just be taking a look at the Euro because really with this storm in particular, we're less than 24 hours away from it occurring. We're not expecting a lot of volatility, and we're not expecting a lot of moving around within the models. And right now, pretty much every single model is agreeing on at least this storm. Now, what they're disagreeing on is, again, that storm for Monday and Tuesday. And again, that's what's going to be catching all the headlines for right now. But I'm going to be focusing mostly on this storm, which is going to be happening tomorrow, Friday, and even into Saturday for some spots. So we're going to be starting off with the low pressure system up in Michigan and Ontario. So we have this up here, we have a trough right behind it, and then we have some moisture surging in from the Gulf because it does create a little avenue in between the high pressure and the low pressure for some moisture to be streamlined further to the north. So it's overall not too complex of a system. It's nothing like what we were expecting from that other storm on Monday and Tuesday where we had multiple different parts. We had one storm coming in from the Atlantic. We had another storm coming in from the north. We had a very deep trough on the back end. We really don't have anything as complex as that. We have one system, just one storm, not multiple different low pressure centers moving around. We have one high pressure system. We have one trough right behind this low pressure system. And really, there's not a lot for the model to handle. There's not a lot that could really get messed up in the forecast in terms of different systems moving around. So these models are actually handling it pretty well. If you were to look at the GFS and the Euro and the Canadian and the German model, they all look pretty much the same. Of course, they have some different computations with the total snowfall. Maybe it's off by a couple inches, depending on which model you look at. But overall, the computation of some of these models are fairly consistent, and really, we're not seeing too much volatility with this storm in particular. We're going to see that rain switch over to light snow in some parts of Michigan by Thursday evening. So for Thanksgiving itself, which, by the way, happy Thanksgiving to all of you guys out there. And also, I will have a video out early tomorrow morning. Early meaning around, I would expect the video to be out by about 9 or 10 a.m. In the morning. I'll probably be recording it earlier than that, but I'll probably delay the posting of that video just so that it's at a more ideal time for you guys to watch it. So I will have another video out tomorrow. I definitely will have time in the morning to get all that done before everybody comes over for Thanksgiving. So that is going to be fun, and I will definitely be having a great time on Thanksgiving. Hopefully you guys will as well. And this is going to be an interesting storm because it will affect some travel plans. I don't think it's going to be a huge travel disturber though. So again, you're going to see some rain. Rain is not going to be a huge deal. It's going to be light to moderate, nothing overly heavy in most spots, and we will see some snow on the back end of this into parts of western Michigan and the UP of Michigan, but even that is quite insignificant in terms of the total snowfall. Now, I think you might have more travel issues if you're traveling through the interior Northeast on your way back from that Thanksgiving meal, especially if you're coming from, let's say, somewhere down in the Ohio or Tennessee Valley, or from the mid-Atlantic, and you're driving up north. You might have more issues, especially if you're driving up some of these interstates that go through some rocky terrain in the interior Northeast, in some of these higher elevation spots. You could definitely get some issues with some snowfall accumulating on the road. I am assuming that they're going to put some rock salt out there on the road, so I don't think it'll be awfully slippery, but it is something that you want to at least have some awareness about. Now, once we move into Friday morning, we might see some snow move in on the back end of the storm for parts of western New York, western Pennsylvania, West Virginia. Those areas could definitely get in on some snowfall. The low pressure system by this point is all the way up here in Quebec. We have rain on the eastern end of this because you guys are going to be in the warm sector of the storm, so you'll be getting all that rain. And then we have snow starting to break out on the western and northern end of the system. If we move this on one more, you can see that we have that system plowing on through the east. By this point, it's into the Atlantic provinces, so it's right on the border with Quebec and New Brunswick in Canada. And we have some snow, moderate to heavy at times, in parts of Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. Coastal areas will likely stay in the mostly rain column, although I would not rule out some mixing with snowfall if you live in parts of eastern and coastal Maine. That would not include the metro areas around Portland, Maine, so I don't think those areas will get in on any snowfall or mixing. But if you live further up on the coast of Maine, closer to the Canada side of things, you could definitely get some amount of mixing, although the majority of your event is going to be rainfall. You're going to have to move a few miles inland to get in on some of the measurable accumulating snowfall. It'll also be quite windy, so this is for Friday evening. We have windy conditions, winds coming out of the northwest at a fairly good clip here. We're looking at 25, 30, 35 miles per hour on the back edge of the system, and that could trigger some lake effect. So even once the system moves by, really the scope of the storm is only this area where you're seeing rain or snow being induced solely because of the storm. Once you get away from that circle, for the most part, you're really not seeing too much rain or snowfall being induced by the storm. More, you're seeing some of that snow coming off of James Bay up in Canada, some of that coming off the Great Lakes in parts of the United States and Canada. So these areas coming off of these bodies of water could see some lake effect, snowfall. And even as you get up into Canada, you could see some ocean effect rainfall in the Atlantic provinces, where you see the winds driving down from actually coming out of the south in these areas and moving up, and actually producing some rain that's only happening because of the winds driving up from the south. So you could see this on both ends, in both rain and snow out of this storm. If we move this on to Saturday morning, still windy in much of the Northeast, so really that's not going to quiet down, but it will quiet down in terms of the precipitation. Still light to moderate snow in parts of Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. And then by Saturday evening and Sunday morning, it is starting to really quiet down. We're not seeing as much. Even with the winds are starting to break up by this point as well. We are going to be going into a much colder pattern, or at least a much colder couple of days after this system moves by. And this is the storm that's, again, drawing all the attention for Monday and Tuesday. And this is going to be a big question as to how weak is the storm. Now, believe it or not, if you live further to the south, I would say if you live within this zone right here and you want to see snow, you would want this to be a weaker storm, because that would mean that this low pressure to the north would be able to deter it from stirring up to the north, which means that if it's a weaker storm, it's just going to kind of slide by, and it'll likely produce some amount of light to moderate snowfall in those spots. If it is a stronger storm, that means that if you live further to the north and even inland, you might have a better chance at snowfall, and it will also be a larger amount of snowfall. So if this were a stronger storm, that would mean that you would have this kind of spinning up towards the end, which would leave many coastal areas out of the system, out of the snow. You would be just rain, but it would give interior areas quite a good chunk of snowfall. So there are many things that we're starting to have to rough out. Yesterday, we were seeing that many of the European and the GFS model were both indicating a flatter, weaker storm, and now we're seeing kind of the reversal. The early afternoon run of the European is showing much more of a volatile, wound up system, which is bringing more snow to the areas that do receive snow, but that area that does receive snow is much further northwest than what we were seeing with the previous ones. So that's my little, my breakdown of what's happening with that storm, and that's my first thought on it. So I'm not really going to be drawing any conclusions just yet. Personally, I think it's a 50-50 shot on whether you get the weaker storm that slides to the south or the stronger storm which moves to the north. And again, it's really a 50-50 coin flip at this point, and we're just going to have to wait it out and see what some of these models end up doing. Here's the snowfall map from the GFS. We're going to show you my snowfall forecast in just a few moments, but the GFS at least is showing a couple inches, especially if you live in the Adirondacks, the mountains up in Vermont and New Hampshire, as well as the northern slice of Maine. Again, you're seeing some minimal amounts as you get further to the south, and even for areas that are in the interior northeast, you're going to have to also add some elevation to that in order to really see any measurable snowfall, unless you're in a lake effect zone. So there are some parts of upstate New York that are getting in on some pretty decent amounts, mainly from lake effect. Same thing in Michigan, as well as parts of Pennsylvania as well. So lake effect combined with higher elevation terrain could definitely give you a few inches of snow. The European model also looking at a decent amount of snowfall. We're looking at right around 4 to 7 inches or more of snowfall in parts of the northern New England region. So parts of the Adirondacks, northern Vermont, northern New Hampshire, and interior Maine could definitely get in on a few inches of snowfall. Again, coastal Maine, coastal New Hampshire, not expecting as much for you guys. Although if you live in east coastal Maine, you could get in on maybe some mixed precipitation, probably not accumulating all that much. Up the Hudson Valley, all the way as far north as about Plattsburgh, I think you guys up there might see some snowfall, but I don't think it's really going to accumulate until you get from Burlington on northward, or until you go east or west of the Hudson River. And then as you move again further inland as well, into parts of Pennsylvania and western New York, you're dealing with a couple inches of snowfall back there as well. Here's my snowfall forecast. This is going from Thanksgiving through Saturday. We're looking at less than 3 inches of snow in parts of northern Wisconsin and Michigan, as well as for parts of West Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania. That's again in the higher elevations. Also less than 3 inches, or really any accumulating or measurable amount of snowfall for much of northwestern Pennsylvania, upstate New York, including the Adirondacks, the Catskills, and then back through Vermont and Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and the Green and White Mountains, as well as the Berkshires, and then the northern half of Maine, or actually the northern 3/4 of Maine, looking at some amount of measurable snowfall, no accumulation or a mix of snowfall. So this is where you might see some flakes flying around, but it's probably not going to stick all that well. That would be for some parts of northern Pennsylvania, southern New York, as well as for coastal Maine, away from Portland. So once you get east of Portland and some of those suburbs over there, you'll probably get in on some amount of mixing, but I don't think it's really going to accumulate all that much. 3 to 5 inches of snowfall if you live in northwestern Pennsylvania or southwestern New York, as well as for northern New York, some of the mountains up in Vermont, New Hampshire, and northern Maine. This is where you're definitely getting in on a decent amount of snowfall. It will have to be shoveled away. So 3 to 5 inches of snowfall. Not a ton of snow, but also you still do need to at least have some amount of understanding that it will be falling, because you are going to have to at least shovel it away, and it might cause some travel issues, especially with the Thanksgiving weekend. If you have people coming over, or if you're going to be going somewhere and then you're trying to make your way back to your house, if you live in this area, you will have to deal with some amount of snowfall on the ground for especially Friday and Saturdays, when the snow will be falling in these areas. 5 to 10 inches of snowfall, lake effect enhanced in parts of northwestern Pennsylvania, as well as for the Adirondacks up in New York. We also have 5 to 10 inches up in the Green and White Mountains in Vermont and New Hampshire, as well as for the northernmost part of Maine, where I do think you could definitely get in on about 5 to 10 inches of snowfall out of the storm. Now that we're kind of not talking about the actual details in terms of snowfall, things like that, here's just kind of a brief understanding of what's happening in the upper air, just to give you an idea of what's going on. We have this system coming out of the Great Lakes, so this is what it looks like for tomorrow afternoon. We have ridging up along the east coast, and that ridging is going to allow the system to kind of strengthen, and it will also increase the wind speeds, because as you're going to see in a moment, once the system heads to the east, it's going to dive down further to the south, but you're also going to see ridging move in from the southern plains and move into the southeast. So now that we have this deep trough into the northeast, already bringing some snow on the back edge of it, it'll move further to the east into parts of New England. Now, the upper air low pressure center will be in New England, but the actual surface low pressure center will be ahead of it, up north and east of Quebec City by that point, and starting to move into the easternmost part of Quebec. So those areas will have some difference in terms of where the surface and the upper air low pressure centers end up being. That could cause some disruption within the storm. It probably won't be able to be as deep because of that, but overall I don't think it's going to have too big of an impact on the forecast itself. And then if we look at one more thing, here's what the pattern is going to look like for Sunday morning, actually. So we have a couple different storms moving around. Here's your system that was for Thanksgiving. It's actually a fairly big, disorganized mess up near Maine and some of the Atlantic provinces in Canada. We then have two more systems. We have one little shortwave trough in Ohio and Indiana and Michigan, and then we have another one in the UP of Michigan and Ontario. What you're going to see, and I don't have the frames loaded up here, but this model brings this low pressure system down into parts of the Ohio Valley, and then it slides this one to the east. So they end up converging somewhere over Pennsylvania or Ohio right in here, and depending on how strong they are, if it's stronger, you could see a track more somewhat like this, where the coastal areas would get out of the snowfall, but you could also see somewhat of a track which just kind of slides to the south, where you see this low pressure system just slide south of New Jersey and into the Delmarva, and those areas further north of that line, of that blue line, would get in on the snowfall. So it is going to be a tricky forecast with this next storm. Not so much with this current storm, but the next storm will definitely be a little bit more of a challenge here in terms of trying to figure out what exactly will happen with the track and also with the intensity, because a lot of people just focus on the track of the storm and they look at each model and they figure out where the storm is being choreographed depending on that particular model run. Now, the models change every 6 hours. They change more so or less so, depending on if there's more volatility or not, depending on how dynamic the pattern is. But in this case, you really want to take this model by model. You don't want to be looking at run by run, just because these are going to change. Really, it does not matter what this morning's run of the European does compared to what last night's run of the European does, because all that's really going to matter until we're within 48 hours of the event. That's when it might start mattering a little bit more. All that really matters is that if you can see a defined trend within some of these models. So right now the trend is for this system to move further north. We'll see if that trend continues, but that is currently the identifiable trend right now, and it's also for the storm to be stronger. There's a lot more players into this storm for Monday and Tuesday than there is for that storm for tomorrow, Friday, Saturday. So the Thursday, Friday, Saturday storm is going to be a breeze to forecast. It's really going to be quite easy to make a decent enough forecast. There really isn't too much model uncertainty right now with that storm, but there is a lot more challenges with this next storm. So even though we have this storm currently going on, you do want to keep your eye on this one in the back of your mind, because these two systems, how they interact with each other, how fast this high pressure system moves in on the back end as well. If it's faster, that means that there's a higher chance that you would get a southerly approach. If it's more of a slow, kind of wound down type of system, it does have more time to strengthen and move to the north. So there's a ton of factors with timing, with intensity, with placement, with how this Thanksgiving storm moves and where that ends up into eastern Canada, how far north or south that is, and how much of a player that'll be on the next storm. So there's really a ton of different factors with this next system. I will be talking more about that either in tomorrow morning's video. It'll really have to depend on if I want to do another update on this Thanksgiving storm. Right now, unless there's a lot of change within the models, I think that I'll probably just keep this forecast as the final one for this Thanksgiving storm, and then I'll move on to this Monday, Tuesday storm. We're gonna probably in tomorrow's video talk briefly about this, and really more in a vague sense, and then once we get closer to the event, we'll start to talk more about the specifics in terms of snow amounts, snow placement, things like that. So this is going to be an interesting week to track. I hope you guys have a great Thanksgiving with your families, and also have a great day, and make sure that you do have your notifications turned on, make sure you are subscribed, and make sure you leave a like down below as well. Goodbye.